Last book I was talking about was The Last Templar, which was a good book. However, it was very much a first book too. When I wrote The Last Templar, I obviously knew that I was going to be a multi-millionaire as soon as I'd finished it, and I'd never have to work again, so it didn't bother me too much about the style of writing and so on. But to my complete horror and quite considerable shock, as soon as a publisher accepted it, headline in August of 1994, they asked for 2 more books in the same series, and that was a huge shock. However, I immediately embarked upon The Merchant's Partner. Now, this was an interesting project because it was the second book I'd written, and I didn't have the faintest idea about what I was going to write about at first. But the good thing about writing anything is when you start doing a bit of research, you start being fired off in all sorts of different directions about what you might want to write about. And part of the job, especially for a historical writer, is knowing what to leave out rather than what to put in. So I started looking back at some of the books I'd been considering when I was writing The Last Templar. The first and obvious one, Dungeon, Fire and Sword. As I mentioned, that was the main inspiration for The Last Templar. But while I was looking at it, another book I found was this, by Norman Cohen, Europe's Inner Demons. And it's basically a history and analysis of all of the different elements of persecution through the centuries. Norman Cohen, being a Jewish guy, was fascinated by the idea of the Holocaust and wanted to know if the Nazis were uniquely evil or if there was any sort of historical background to the way that they behaved. The first thing he came across of the Knights Templar, which he said was just self-evidently an entirely unjust persecution. The second group that he hit on, though, was witches. It was very clear to him that if you were a poor little old lady and you happened to have a pig that was an attractive option for your next door neighbour, you could very easily be accused of witchcraft just so that your neighbour could grab hold of your possessions. I thought that was an interesting idea, and I wanted to start off with this whole concept of how villages used to treat the older people in the area, and also look at the whole concept of the village wise woman. And she may have been a midwife, she could have been someone who was known for being a bit handy with potions, but I wanted to look at all of that side of things. It was particularly useful for me because I could start analysing the different functions of different people in villages around the early 1300s, and so I started off looking at the local farmers and peasants, but also what sort of merchants there were, what sort of tradespeople. So I started looking through all types of different strata of peasant life and town life for that period. And the great thing is that not only did it, I think, produce one of the nicest covers I've had on any books at all. I really like that. The modern cover is extremely good, but I don't think it quite has the same sort of impact as the bright blue and the snow. But it also was the very first book I wrote, being my second book, that didn't have any editorial comments. Basically, it was a book that, when it was taken on by Headline, they felt that it was ready to go immediately. There was no changes in the story, no additional characterisation, no additional plot, nothing. They felt it was ready to go as a working, solid crime book already. And that was very, very gratifying. And it's probably meant that this has a large part of my affection in the series, in all the titles in my series. This is one of my favourites. I've always liked it, I still do, I hope you do too. And that's about it. Thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed this and you want to find out more about my other books, don't forget to like this and subscribe to the channel, and I hope you'll be coming back for other books in the future. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers.